Good morning, and welcome to the Construction Industry Institute's webinar, Shutting Down a Project, a Framework and Lessons Learned. Thank you for making time to join us today. We have some webinar information on the left there. Please keep your microphones muted as that'll help us cut down on background noise. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box in your Zoom control panel. I'll bring them up during the presentation, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. On the right side, you can see our agenda for the call. I'm Mike Pappas, CII's Associate Director for Deployment, and I'll be your moderator today. With me are Bill Boyd, the Director of Shared Services at Southern Company, and Doug Omichinski, the Corporate Manager of Construction at Bechtel Global Corporation. Why did we choose this topic for a webinar? I'm going to throw a poll up here, and this is anonymous, but let's take a minute and please vote on there what the status of your company and your projects are. Lots of responses coming in. Give you about 5 or 6 more seconds.
Apologies for the interruption, but there's a few questions on the conversation side, if they will be answered at the end or at the beginning, or throughout the presentation. One of them being if the slide deck will be shared.
Thanks. Yes, the slide deck will be shared. It'll be on our blog page, which you see the link there. We're also recording the webinar. That will be linked from the blog page as well. And the questions, when Bill and Doug are talking, I'll be looking at the questions and we'll answer as many of those as we go as we can. And then we'll catch the rest at the end. Thanks, Rania. Okay, I'm gonna shut the polling down. We've got 204 responses. Sharing the results here. 42% of projects are only shut down where mandatory, which doesn't surprise me. 11% of projects are shut down, or 11% of the 200 respondents, all of their company projects are shut down. 34%, none shut down yet, but we're planning for that contingency. So thanks for that. That's just interesting anecdotal data. You know, last week, Boston's mayor shut down construction sites all across the city. And since then, a few neighboring cities followed suit. Late last week, Pennsylvania's governor shut down construction across his state as part of a broader statewide order, including a chemical mega project with more than 6,000 workers on site. California's governor exempted construction from that statewide shutdown. In San Francisco, which may have the strictest overall response to the virus, they allowed housing construction to continue, but required commercial sites to shut down. Needless to say, this situation is extremely fluid, but it would not be a surprise to see more projects required to shut down due to COVID-19. CII's members have been discussing project impacts, including shutting down project sites due to the virus. We want to share some information and lessons learned about shutting down projects with the hope that this information will help you prepare for this contingency. First, look at existing response plans. I doubt many projects had a specific COVID-19 response plan a few months ago, but it is worth it to take a look at existing contingency plans, whether those are hurricane plans, business continuity plans. There's information in those that is applicable to the situation. Use the existing structure you've already planned through and modify it to fit the detailed situation. Bill, what are some of the things that an owner has to consider when shutting down a project site due to COVID-19?
Well, there's a lot goes into that. We're very familiar, I guess, with shutting down projects due to natural disasters and starting projects back up. But the COVID-19 has its own, I guess, nuances. I think the restart is something, not just shutting down, but the restart something that we have to plan for and that we're working towards. How do we restart the projects? So what does that restart plan look like from a craft perspective, equipment, contracts, all those things?
Okay, thank you. And we're going to cover that. That's actually our fourth point today, and we'll get into that into some more detail. Doug, what does this look like from a contractor's point of view?
For the contractors, especially for us, before we can go into a shutdown mode, we have to be aligned with our customers on what's going on, what's happening at their sites, preparing plans so that they understand what our problems are going to be, how long we'll take to be able to demobilize the site, how we'll be able to restart the site. As far as an emergency response for this type of situation, being that we're a global company, we do have pandemic type response plans in place for our larger camp jobs that are in other countries. And a lot of cases where we're bringing in foreign labor, international labor to those countries. Those countries do demand that we understand that we could start some issues or some pandemic issues at those camps. So we've been able to adjust those plans to our projects worldwide, to the sites, and to be able to prepare for those sites that are continuing to work as far as preparations and how to work during this type of situation. The one concern we always have is when we do shut down a project, how do we retain the craft? How do we keep track of our craft personnel and our professionals when they do leave? In some cases, we've got arrangements with the customers on what essential personnel we need to maintain at the sites. You mentioned the 6,000 workers at the site in Pennsylvania. That's our site at the PennChem site with Shell. Prior to the shutdown, we came to an agreement with them on what essential personnel look like, which translated to about 500 individuals. That included our foreman and general foreman, which allowed us to continue planning the work after the restart and also planning for the restart. The one thing that we have done throughout is established a crisis management team that meets every day, that addresses all the issues that come from all of our projects all over the world. And so that we can share some of the lessons learned, some of the best practices that are occurring. And then we can also share some of the issues that the country, or if we're domestic, some of the states or the counties are going through, so that we can share all those lessons learned so that everyone's doing the right thing.
Great, thank you. One thing that has been mentioned a few times is that we're all in this together. It's a great time to adopt a collaborative approach with our contractual partners, rather than an adversarial or every company for themselves type of approach. Quite a few sites have mentioned surprising levels of owners and contractors helping each other through this situation, and that's important to have the team on the same page and to successfully manage this. Our second point, let me see here. Our second point is to communicate. Communicate with local government and health officials. Monitor social media to see how a project is being viewed in the community. One mega project in a remote area was shut down in large part because the local medical facilities couldn't handle an outbreak among the thousands of craftspeople on site. Doug, what kind of communication challenges have your projects had to overcome?
Not so much with, as far as communication with the customer, that has been, our customers has been very successful. We're very aligned on whether, how we're going to proceed, if we're going to continue to work, how we're going to shut down the projects, what our time frame is for restarting the projects. Where we've struggled a little bit is in the understanding the requirements that are being imposed either by the country, the state, the city, the county in which we're working. Those seem to be to vary in wherever our projects are, and so we're trying to be proactive. We've got quite a large team in our PR departments that reach out to the states, to the countries that we're working in, to understand better what's coming so that we can be more proactive, so that we can prepare. As you can imagine, we don't want our individuals trapped in outside of the United States. If they are on projects, we want to be able to bring them back. Working, for example, working within Taiwan, when the outbreaks first started, the Taiwanese government was very forward with us, gave us a lot of information that we were able to digest so that we could remove our personnel from Taiwan in a timely manner. So it's where we have struggled, Mike, is understanding what's coming next and understanding the restrictions that are going to come up, and then how do we react. In a lot of cases, we've already gone through it with some of the offices. So when an order comes through, like it did in Houston yesterday for shelter in place, we were able to shut down the Houston office very effectively because we'd already done that in our Western Virginia and our London offices.
Okay. Bill, please give us some examples of who your projects are communicating with that might be different than the typical project communication channels.
Well, I think these local, state, and federal groups that Doug mentioned is spot on to make sure we're in lockstep with them. So that relationship, that proactive communication before something happens is key. And I think what we've seen also on some sites is a communication on the site, either not using the mass meetings on site that would typically use or gatherings, but using technology either through email or radio broadcast, things like that to get information out. But definitely the communication is key. It's always key, but in this instance, it's actually more so.
Yeah, a number of companies have mentioned, communicating daily with the workforce. One of them, as you mentioned, Bill, is using walkie-talkies to conduct a daily radio broadcast across the site to small groups of less than 10 people to keep people informed. In a crisis situation like we're in, and especially where things are changing so rapidly, it's important to stay in touch with people and keep people informed. Our next major point, as always, we want to focus on safety. Sometimes when there are distractions such as shutting down the project site, it's easy for our attention to be diverted from our typical process of thinking through safety issues in a thorough preventive manner. Shutdowns can easily result in more trips, falls, dropped objects, pinch point injuries, and other types of safety incidents. We need to have the same or more focus on the work at hand and the basic safety aspects of that work. Doug, how do you maintain an emphasis on safety in the midst of distractions?
So for the projects that are continuing to work during this time, we've put more focus on supervision in the field. We want a lot more supervision, a lot more of our non-craft professionals in the field to work with our craft professionals. There has to be an understanding that during this time that their productivity might not be where it would be normally. And so we want to focus on the critical activities, the activities that need to get done, both the direct activities and the indirect activities. you're going to have concern from the workforce. We've had many projects where the craft have come into the project in the morning, have heard about some of the cases that have happened, whether it be, close to the project or in the same county, and have decided that they did not want to be there that day. So you have to have some patience. You have to have some better understanding of what our workers are going through to be able to keep them safe. We know that they're concerned about their families. They're concerned about what's going on outside of the projects. So we don't, we're not pushing hard on issues that could cause safety issues and could cause harm to the workers.
Bill, how about your projects?
I think this over communicating. So we've got to realize that this is a distraction for everybody. And so how do we over communicate that safety is still first and foremost in what we do? I think that's what Doug's saying. We may have to give some, maybe some leniency in some areas that would normally maybe not acceptable, but recognizing that these distractions, people are worried about what's going on around them, what's going on with their families, what's going on back at home. So how do we constantly communicate? And nobody has all the answers. I saw somebody had a question about what's specific to my side. I think that's something we're finding is every situation is unique. How do I communicate with my team, with my project, with a group to get them information more real time and more proactively than I normally would?
Okay, thank you. The virus rather has all of us focused on social distancing. Many of us are working from home and so forth. So we know what that looks like in the office, but what does that look like on the job site while you're shutting it down or continuing work? There's an article just this morning in Pipeline News that LNG Canada, which is another mega project, is going to cut its workforce in half on its site in order to provide more physical room around people. Bill, what are you seeing with respect to safety that's different due to the virus?
I'm sorry. We do use a behavior-based safety program. And so we're having some targeted conversations around the virus. Of course, we are doing the distancing, the smaller groups, all those things, but also just having the behavior-based upfront proactive conversations around issues people could be having or at-risk behaviors, and put more emphasis on that.
Okay, Doug, have your projects done anything special that hasn't been mentioned yet?
I think you mentioned, splitting some of the shifts. We've gone to rolling 410s on some projects where you split the team. They come in for the first 40 hours of the week, and then the next team comes in for the next 40 hours, splitting a lot more responsibility through the day shift and the night shift. Staggering the starts and stops, the lunch breaks, the breaks if there are breaks. There's a continual cleaning, so you're giving a sense to the workers that once they do have a break and once they do have lunch, that everything's being cleaned up behind them. We've had more transport options instituted at our projects that are using transport from parking lots and such, and assuring that there's only one person sitting in a seat, so bringing in more buses, more transport options. So we're doing everything we can for that social distancing. The reality is the craft professionals do have to work together, but we're trying to ensure that we can spread the work by also spreading these shifts.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a couple other things I know that some of the sites are doing around turnstiles, using electronic badging, trying to get away from the touch points for the turnstiles. And also, I think one of the sites is separating the nurses station. So typically we have a nurses station where folks would go to the nurses station for injuries or illnesses. We're trying to separate those out on some of the sites that can do that.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. Thank you. There's a couple other things that some of our member companies have mentioned. One is using thermal scanners to screen workers as they get onto buses in the parking lot or as they come on site. Of course, when you do that, just like Bill said, you have to make sure you've got a location set aside for anybody that does have a fever. One company installed hand wash stations that use a foot pump or a foot lever, so they're touchless. You don't have to touch the faucet, turn it on and off with your hands. A company mentioned that they're having lunches delivered to the site rather than allowing people to go into town to get lunch. So there's some specific examples of some things that companies have done in order to help improve the social distancing. And again, whether you're trying to shut down a project or you're continuing to work it, those things are important. Bill mentioned this just from the beginning. You know, these aren't permanent shutdowns. We do need to keep the restart plan in mind. So how do you mothball the site in an organized manner to improve your likelihood of a smooth restart? And when this is over, it's a large number of projects that are going to attempt to remobilize at the same time. It's not just, you know, one project here and there. So how efficiently will all those resources, the labor, the supply chain get back to work? This all is going to require careful and detailed planning and a lot of proactive communication throughout the shutdown. There's also the aspect of taking care of your people. Doug mentioned this earlier. What do you plan to do for your craft? How will you stay in touch with them and let them know when you're going to remobilize? Will your laid off craft be compensated or kept on the payroll or not? Again, there's stories in the news today where some contractors have called a 2-week halt and they're paying their labor for that 2 weeks. Now, how long can that go on is a good question, but these kind of questions are what we need to think about. Doug, how are your projects planning for remobilization from a contractor perspective?
Well, Mike, I think you hit it on the head as far as what we're concerned about is when we do dispatch our craft professionals from the projects, how do we track their location? How can we communicate with them on the status of the project and for when they could come back? We use two methods. We're using ServiceNow and Everbridge to be able to communicate with our craft once they leave. In some cases where our projects have had a completion bonus in place for the craft, we've had agreements with our customer in being able to give the craft a portion of that completion bonus when they leave the site, and then promise to them a portion of that completion bonus for coming back to the site, so that we can ensure that they are going to come back. For others, we've other projects, depending on the state, we've kind of paved the way for the furloughs to happen quicker, so that the unemployment benefits can be applied for quicker, but then also continually communicating about the status of the project. One thing that our customers have not pushed back on is the use of essential personnel. So when we've identified essential personnel to stay at the project, to continue planning, to continue identifying materials, the issues we may have with the supply chain, these are the things that then we are better prepared to come back and understand what's available to work, what's unavailable to work. In some cases, the plan is a phased approach where we're not bringing back all 6,000, 7,000, depending on which project it is, employees at the same time, but bringing them back in phases so that we can effectively start up the site, both with the the direct activities and also the support indirect activities.
Thanks. You know, you mentioned a couple of times now, essential people and continuing to plan the project. You know, that's a pretty good silver lining in the middle of all this. You know, nobody wants to shut down a project, but yet if we have to do that, how can we keep some people planning the construction? This could be a great, you know, planning oftentimes falls behind, it gets overcome by events. This could be a great opportunity to catch up on planning, to have a more thorough execution plan going forward. It could be a great opportunity to catch up with, to allow engineering to catch up on projects where engineering is behind, and so on and so forth. So all the news isn't bad, even though a lot of it, you know, shutting down a project is very painful.
And I would say, Mike, you know, when you do consider essential personnel, you're not just putting the site manager, you're not just putting some of the senior leadership in that essential list. You're also including the superintendents, the field engineers that you know, that basically are planning the work as far as the material and the technical information, but you're also including your general foreman and your foreman, who are the everyday at the front line planning the work. So you want them to be able to get out ahead also in establishing the plan.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Great points. Thanks. Bill, how about from an owner perspective?
I think the plan, you know, what Doug said, it really depends on what phase of the project you're in. If you're in execution, definitely those things are spot on. If you're at FAL 1, 2, 3, whatever phase you're at, you know, it could mean something different. I hope we take the opportunity as an industry as a whole to do some of the planning, to do some of the upfront work that we sometimes don't have time to do. So I think from an owner, what I would say is we're expecting to have good, where are we at today with the projects, good baseline schedules, good baseline cost forecast, and be able to manage the project going forward with our partners. What's the implications for the project depending on when we restart? And then how do you do a controlled restart?
Great. You know, a couple of people have asked questions about the slide deck, and the slide deck is going to be made available at on CII's blog webpage. The website for that is www.construction-institute.org/blog. So it's our homepage, just add a /blog to the end of it. One of our members gave us an article written in 2010 in Exploration and Production magazine that discussed project slowdown and restart plans that were used at the time due to the economic environment of oil and gas projects. It was, you know, economic in nature. Some projects shut down completely, but an awful lot of projects just slowed down. But this article is available on the blog site, and it's probably worth reviewing that and adjusting for today's issues. Again, focusing on restart. Our fifth point is change orders and claims. And Bill, you mentioned, you know, from a project control standpoint, of course, that's dear to your heart, you know, knowing exactly where the project is. Projects that are shut down due to a government order are likely to see claims submitted. That's not a surprise. But it is important to separate change orders and claims and impacts due to COVID-19 from those that were caused prior to a shutdown. So understanding exactly where you are, what are the impacts of actions that have taken right now, so that you can separate those impacts from, you know, how the job has been managed so far versus those from the COVID shutdown. Make sure that you know the current state of the project so these things don't get commingled. Bill, as an owner, how are you handling that situation with respect to change orders and claims?
Well, I think we've asked all the projects to make sure they're current and in sync with our partners as far as what issues do we have, you know, to date. And then as we go, we've received, you know, force majeure letters from most of our partners. Just recognizing they're writing the contract. Hey, we don't know what the impact of this is going to be. We're trying to separate out, if we have issues going on now, how do we document those? How do we keep those going forward? See a comment about procurement. Definitely procurement is in the loop. All the formal communication back with our partners goes to our procurement organization. But we're just making sure we're on the same page with our partners. We look at this as we both have got to succeed. If we fail or our partner fails, it's not good for either one of us, and the project is not successful. So we're working hard to make sure we're all on the same page and understand, what are the impacts this is going to be to a project.
Okay, Doug, what about a contractor view? And what are you seeing from your subcontractors and vendors?
I think Bill hit it on the head. I mean, this situation was a surprise to the owners. It was a surprise to the contractors who are building the projects. I think the last thing that the owner wants from a contractor is to be talking about contract terms before any kind of shutdown plan or restart plan is put into place. For the most part, our owners have acknowledged this unusual situation in which there are contractual mechanisms by which we can work to. Those contractual mechanisms are working in the background, not just only with our owners in the prime contract space, but also with our subcontractors and suppliers. But the key is to continue to work, be aligned, get the projects going as quickly as we can with the owner, but also focusing on the supply chain and focusing on our subcontractors, keeping them in the loop for major decisions or flow downs that may come from our customer and owner. So it really comes down to just being aligned and being and communicating. The business side will eventually take care of itself, but the key is to get the projects back and running.
Okay, thank you very much. We're now going to go into questions and answers. Again, please input your questions into the group chat, and we'll go through these and see how many we can answer here. How do you ensure that contractors are not withholding information to prevent a job from being shut down? Fear of job loss.
We've had, I think the alignment that Doug talked about is got to be in place. I know we've had many conversations with our partners about, safety is front and foremost. We've had formal communication with them and conference call, teleconference with our partners, just talking about. We've got a protocol we're going through right now around self checks, daily self checks, and there's a criteria for that. And we've shared with all our contractors, it's a requirement to do that, and how we're taking that just as serious as we do our safety. So, Mike, I think the alignment with our partners to make sure, we're both on the same page. If they have concerns, let's get those on the table and talk about them. But we can't have people hiding information from each other. The results of that would not be good for either party.
Yeah, great answer. Thanks. Somebody mentions if you have fewer people on site or working on shifts or staggering work, then there's an increased safety risk. Please tell us how you deal with this.
Well, then, that is true. In a lot of cases where our projects have shut down, we've had the availability of additional supervision and safety personnel that we've been able to move to other projects that are continuing to work. So we've been able to increase the number of non-craft professionals in the field to be able to deal with that and to deal with the unusual situation that we're dealt with and trying to enforce the rules around the pandemic, around health and safety in our employees.
Okay. Are people putting in place a site continuity plan in case key site personnel are affected, in case they get sick?
I can answer that. We've actually had that situation come up in one of our projects, and it's actually with Southern at the Vogel power station. We've had, it's not just if they've come up sick or have to be quarantined. In some cases, some at high risk employees have decided that they do not want to work on site, so we've granted them that. And so in this case, we have reached out to other projects in the enterprise to be able to bring personnel in as a contingency. We're lucky in that case that we do have some projects that are shut down, and we do have those personnel available. If not, we would be looking outside externally to try and bring people in. But currently, we've been able to use our own enterprise resources.
Hey, Mike, and we've done the same thing on some of our projects or some of our subject matter experts that are, for whatever reason, may not be able to be at the site. So we put other plans in place to get that same level of service to the projects.
All right, thank you. Another comment here is that an option is to move some activities from site built to pre-assembly or precast shops that might not be affected so much, their area may not be affected so much by the virus. So, under the idea of adapting to a changing situation, and certainly that's not going to keep all the progress moving, but that is an option, is to take a look at the execution plan and how the job's being planned, and some of the smaller work may be able to be moved off site. Are either of you seeing any of that type of thing being done?
The only thing I would say is that we're continuing, if there are assemblies or pre-assemblies or modules that are being constructed, if those sites aren't affected, that is continuing. We have, because this has been such a short duration since we've shut down a lot of our projects. It's only been in the 8th or 9th day. We haven't looked at other alternatives, but if this continues longer, this is the type of strategy that we'll talk to our customers about on, how do we make progress on the project outside of the project, taking advantage of areas in the country or other countries that are not affected.
Hey, Mike, I don't know if we're doing any more, but I'll say this is just another case for offsite fabrication modernization that if we could, if somebody was borderline on that right now is definitely time to make that business case even stronger.
Yeah, there's a comment here that's very important to have a list of key suppliers and alternates, and I guess this applies to subcontractors too. The idea here in the comment is, there is a risk of bankruptcy especially for smaller companies, I suppose, but key suppliers and subcontractors, some of those firms may not make it through this, and so it's important to be thinking through plan B on some of those issues. Again, contingency planning.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In some cases where we have JV partners, we're also worried about their survival also.
Yeah, great point. Here's a question. Are you selecting restart dates to get contractor resources lined up so their other customers don't book them up? Or in other words, I guess, are you selecting estimated restart dates at this time, or are you just staying flexible with it for now?
From an EPC contractor's perspective and our projects, we're just staying flexible. We're prepared to go back. Like I mentioned, we're as far as the resources, we're staying in constant touch and communication with the resources, so that they know when. But there may be a return to work. A lot of this is being determined by some of the states. Some of the states have put actual dates against returning, but we know that we've got to stay flexible because those dates could change.
Are either of you dealing with linear projects like cross-country pipelines or electric transmission lines and that types of thing? Is a linear project, are there any differences there versus a one-site project?
I guess the closest I would come to a linear project is some of the rail jobs that we're doing, some of the whether it be rapid transit or light rail systems, or the one of the projects is the Texas high-speed rail project. Those projects have been put on, in most cases, have been put on hold or have shut down for the time being. So we haven't had any linear type projects that we're continuing right now.
And Mike, I think the ones I'm aware of for Southern is, it's a little bit, there's some different variables associated with those than a site that has a large concentrated workforce. But those variables got to be managed also. So your logistics, how do you have the separation you need, those kind of things from basically the public is key. But you still have to go through those. How do we keep the workers, the project team safe? But definitely different elements from what we'd have on a site that had hundreds or thousands of workers.
Okay. Any suggestions on how to handle escalation of cost for these projects that require demobilization and remobilization for restart later in the year?
I'm going to leave that to Bill.
Yeah, I know we've had some conversations with some agencies, not all our contractors, some agencies. Could you share in some of the impact of that? But that's not global, and that's not an answer. I think one of the things is we're struggling with this. I'm struggling with this because I like things in order. We like things. A lot of folks on the call are engineers. I don't think anybody has all the answers. If any of the 280-some folks on the call have all the answers, you probably could make a lot of money right now of sharing those answers. But I think we've got to be flexible. I think we have to work together, and I think this group has an opportunity to share where we've had success, where you've had success, and the ideas. I think that's why we're getting so many of the comments is how do we share and learn from each other?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, so we're out of questions. Just before we wrap up, rather, in this slide deck, which again, we're going to post this on CII's blog page shortly, so you'll have the links. But we have a list of some helpful sources of information for you. Some of them are construction specific, a couple of them are just general, and a couple of articles as well. And the last thing that I've got is, before we have our closing comments, is CII members are invited to join a free CURT webinar. That's the Construction Users Roundtable. This is tomorrow, as you see the information up there on the screen, and the registration link is down at the bottom. Doug, do you have any closing comments?
And the only thing I would say, Mike, is that the situation we're in is extremely dynamic. Because we established this crisis management team within Bechtel, we're dealing with every possible situation that is occurring at all our projects, regardless of their location, outside the United States, inside the United States. And that has been very effective in being able to share lessons learned between projects, between business lines, and being able to react a lot quicker. And so if individual companies, EPC contractors, owners have not established that type of team, I highly recommend that they do, because it, you know, as we're seeing, things are changing hourly, and we're having to react very quickly. And with a crisis team, you can have a standard approach to reacting to some of these challenges.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks. Bill, do you have any closing comments?
No, I just wish we could figure out a way and see how I could help do this. Maybe is how do we share those lessons learned, best practices? What is, like Doug said, it is changing. I mean, we can talk now, and an hour from now, something's going to be different on somebody's side. But how can we share their information?
Yeah, that's a good.
You know, can CI help us do that?
That's a great point. Well, let me thank you for both of you, Doug and Bill, for taking the time to share your experience with all of us today. We really appreciate you. And thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Send us an email with any comments, your own lessons learned, questions that you'd like us to answer. You know, we're a member-driven organization, and we're here for you. So use that communications@CII email address to let us know, give us some feedback. And thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Keep on my text.